Hello, and welcome to this news event held by the law firm Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise, or Peiffer Wolf for short. You'll be hearing from three speakers today, and then we'll open the floor for questions during the Q&A period. The Q&A period will be for reporters only, and if you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. For more info, you can go to lostembryos.com where you can find the news release and other related materials. We'll also drop a direct link to the news release in the chat for everybody so you can access it right here. And as I mentioned, you'll be hearing from three speakers today. First will be Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf. Second, Marissa Calhoun, former patient of Andy Huang at RPMG. And third, Stephen Castaneda, Marissa's partner and former patient of Dr. Andy Huang at RPMG. So let's begin with our first speaker, Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf.
Thank you, Max, and thank you for joining this news conference. My name is Adam Wolf, and I'm a partner at Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise, or Peiffer Wolf for short. Today, I'll be discussing the lawsuit we filed against Reproductive Partners Medical Group, RPMG, on behalf of our clients, Marissa Calhoun and Stephen Castaneda. After I speak a little bit about the lawsuit and what it means, you'll hear from Marissa and Stephen about what they've gone through and the nightmare that they're still going through. In short, RPMG literally treated Marissa and Stephen's embryos like trash. Marissa's treatment at RPMG began in 2021 because of her endometriosis. It was necessary to have her eggs retrieved and frozen to preserve her fertility. Marissa endured three very difficult egg retrieval procedures in 2021 and 2022, with the retrieved eggs stored by RPMG. In October of 2023, Marissa learned that she would need to undergo a surgery that could further compromise her fertility. RPMG's Dr. Andy Huang advised Marissa and Stephen to create embryos using Marissa's stored eggs and Stephen's sperm before Marissa's surgery took place. Dr. Huang said that it would help advise whether it might be advisable for Marissa to undergo an additional egg retrieval before her operation, in the event Marissa and Stephen didn't end up with enough viable embryos following fertilization for their desired family size. Later that October, RPMG informed Marissa and Stephen that it had fertilized her eggs and placed them in an incubator to grow into 16 viable embryos. But a few days later, Dr. Huang called and told Marissa that RPMG had discarded and thus destroyed their embryos. RPMG eventually admitted that an employee had not labeled the embryos before placing them in the incubator, and then later took the unlabeled embryos out of the incubator and just threw them away. RPMG's incompetence and recklessness actually increased from there. Marissa and Stephen requested their records to help understand how RPMG committed this grave misconduct. But instead of providing full records, RPMG sent Marissa an incomplete set of records on 3 separate occasions, repeatedly sending records that omitted any reference to RPMG discarding their embryos. What makes this case so outrageous is that RPMG not only failed to label Marissa and Stephen's embryos, but later threw out those unlabeled embryos without any thought or concern. And then RPMG repeatedly failed to disclose their records of this disaster. Instead of providing full records, as was legally required, RPMG provided incomplete records on 3 separate occasions. RPMG gaslighted Marissa and Stephen. This is no way to treat any patient, let alone people who trusted RPMG to start their family. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Marissa and Stephen. I look forward to your questions in the Q&A period.
Thank you. Again, that was Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf. Let's proceed to our second speaker, Marissa Calhoun, former patient of Dr. Andy Huang at RPMG.
Good afternoon. My name is Marissa Calhoun. Let me start by saying that I am a very private person. It is extremely difficult for me to share something that has caused me so much pain in private so publicly. I'm speaking out today because I know that when it comes to infertility, I am one of many. And if sharing my story can prevent even one person from enduring the horror I've experienced at the hands of RPMG, I will find the strength to tell it over and over again. Millions of women will be diagnosed with infertility in their lifetime. And many, like me, suffer from debilitating conditions like endometriosis, which in turn complicate and sometimes crush their dreams of becoming mothers. For some, IVF is a silver lining in an otherwise dark cloud. It can give couples like Stephen and I a reason to believe we can create the family we've always wanted again. And it can reignite hope where it was once lost. I wish this was our story. For nearly 2 decades, my doctors told me that my chances of conceiving a child naturally were extremely low, that IVF was my best option of becoming a mother. When I began treatment at RPMG in 2021, they took care to reiterate this information to me again and again. And when my partner Stephen and I came to RPMG's Dr. Huang last October with our dreams of starting our family together when the time was right, he insisted that we could trust RPMG with the next steps of our journey as Southern California's premier fertility clinic. And so we did. Then RPMG shattered that trust. I knew something was wrong as soon as I answered the phone. Dr. Huang started the call by saying he'd never had to make a call like this before. And instantly my heart sank. I asked Dr. Huang whether we should phone Stephen to include him, but mostly so I wouldn't be alone. But Dr. Huang insisted he'd rather talk to me alone first. What he shared next changed my life. Our embryos, the very ones that represented our dream of a family, had been thrown away. The grief was immediate and overwhelming. RPMG didn't just discard our embryos. They tossed out our hopes for our family's future and trust in the very people who took an oath to do no harm. On that day, they broke that oath. Harm was caused, and it is irreparable. This journey has been incredibly lonely, filled with medical procedures, tests, and expenses, only to have everything come crashing down in the worst possible way. I am fortunate to have an amazing partner in Stephen who has stood by me through it all. But the pain of RPMG's betrayal remains, and the wound is deep. Our embryos represented our dream of a family together. Losing them is our worst nightmare. Sharing this story is one of the hardest things that I've ever done. But I hope doing so can protect others from this experience and place a spotlight on the kind of carelessness and neglect that's becoming all too common amongst fertility clinics like RPMG. Thank you for listening to my story.
Again, that was Marissa Calhoun, and we'll hear next from her partner, Stephen Castaneda. Go ahead, Stephen.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Castaneda, and I just want to start by saying to Marissa that I love you, and that no matter what we go through, I'm proud to stand by your side. You are such a strong, resilient woman, and knowing you and how private you are, I can see how important it is for you to speak up for women, and especially women who are overcoming various obstacles to become mothers. I also vividly remember the day we got the news from Dr. Huang. Marissa called me right after she spoke to him, and immediately I could sense that something terrible happened. I'd never heard that much pain in her voice before, It was a pain that I could only associate with the death of a loved one. I hate the helplessness of this situation. You feel powerless telling your partner that it will be okay when really you have no idea if that is true, let alone what to do or how to make it better. And you even feel more helpless trying to get your medical record from your doctors when it seems like their only concern is running away from their failures. This loss is devastating. Marissa and I are going through a grieving process. We are trying to come to grips with the fact that we may never get to have the family we so badly want to have. We are coping with the fact that RPMG stripped us of the power of choice. RPMG's conduct has taken a terrible toll on both of us. It infuriates me. Like Marissa, I hope that by telling our story, we can help prevent this from happening to other people in the future. This is unacceptable and preventable. Thank you.
Thank you again. That was Stephen Castaneda, and that takes us to the Q&A portion of the call. If you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask your question. As a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you have any issues with your own audio or the raise your hand function, you can use the text-based Q&A box, and we'll do our best to get the questions there as well. And I just want to mention that a video recording of this news event will be available online later today. That'll be at the Lost Embryos website, and it's going to be along with the other media materials. That's lostembryos.com, no spaces. Okay, let's go to our first question. It's coming from Leticia Juarez at ABC7 in LA. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Leticia.
Good morning. I'm so sorry for your loss, first of all, those embryos, but I wanted to ask Ms. Calhoun and Mr. Castaneda, how did you go about choosing RPMG? What brought you to them?
You know, this process, this journey of going through IVF is incredibly lonely, and it's very important to seek out a support system. And so I actually found out about RPMG from colleagues and other women who were at the same clinic or already using that clinic. And they recommended giving it a shot. They shared various experiences across some of the clinics in Southern California, and the highs and lows. And they were pretty honest about the fact that a lot of them feel like factories, but they recommended I give it a shot. So that's how I learned about it.
Thank you.
Let's go to our next question. It's coming from Christy Fajardo at Fox 11 in LA. Go ahead, Christy. Please unmute yourself.
Hi. I had a question about the employee who discarded the embryos, and I'm very sorry that happened to you. Is that employee still working for the clinic?
Thanks, Christy, for your question. It's a good one. We don't know the answer to that. Unfortunately, you know, the laboratories of fertility clinics are kind of black boxes. You don't really know what happens behind the curtain. You don't know when a fertility clinic like RPMG loses your embryos unless and until they tell you. And here we don't know whether that person still works at RPMG anymore. I certainly hope not. And part of the reason that we are doing this press conference is to shine a light on some of these abuses and misconduct in fertility clinics so that people are better trained and this doesn't happen again.
Thanks, Christy. As a reminder, while we have our speakers assembled, if you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function. And if you are in a noisy room, if you're having issues with the raise your hand function, there is a text-based Q&A box. It's at the bottom of the Zoom console, and you can also type a question there. Let's go ahead and take our next question. It comes from Jackie Davalos at Bloomberg News. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Jackie.
Hi, thank you guys for sharing your story. And, I realize that this is wrapped up in a lot of uncertainty and pain. What strikes me about your situation is that you decided to go public with it. And in my conversations with attorneys and other experts in the field, I understand that these sorts of cases are usually kept under wraps. And when people come forward, it makes it difficult to perhaps recoup some of the financial costs that went into it. And I wonder if you guys could, could talk about what the process looked like to come forward with this, if the clinic advised you not to, if there was kind of any discussion about, doing like mediating this behind closed doors versus in a public manner. And ultimately, what drove your decision to kind of come forward with this versus perhaps negotiate it behind the scenes?
Sure. Jackie, I'm going to let Marissa and Stephen answer this in a moment. I will say that we don't disclose whether there have been any sort of settlement discussions or mediation in the past. But Marissa and Stephen, why don't you talk a little bit about why it was important for you to come forward and talk about this publicly?
Absolutely. I said at the beginning of my statement, and I will reiterate, that I'm a private person, and it is incredibly difficult to talk about this publicly. When you have a condition like endometriosis and you're unable to get pregnant naturally, many women, I don't want to assign this feeling of shame to other women that I haven't spoken to personally, but I know many women and myself. It is an incredibly lonely journey, and it is an incredibly shameful journey. You feel like something is wrong with you. So I think it was both hard because it is painful to have to sit here and recount the horror that we experienced at the hands of RPMG, but it is also really painful because I'm speaking publicly about a condition that led me to seek IVF in the first place. And so I think, all that said, if I don't speak out, where will accountability for RPMG and other clinics begin? To your point, a lot of these things often do get settled behind closed doors. And then what happens? More incidents like what's happened to Stephen and I. And there's no real regulation. There's no real procedure. To Adam's earlier point, we don't even know what happened to the technician who threw our embryos away. We were told, they were having discussions with this person months ago, but we have had no real follow-up on the outcomes there. And so how can I be sure that if a friend of mine, or even a stranger, another woman in my shoes, goes to RPMG, and they sell her the same thing they sold me about being this premier clinic that is so reputable, that they won't have the same experience? And I just couldn't live with that. So I don't know if that answers your question. And it's a very complicated answer because this is a complicated situation. But essentially, we came forward because we felt like we had a responsibility to, despite how painful it was.
And I'll thank you, Marissa. It takes a lot of strength for Marissa and Stephen to come forward like this and to do this publicly. They genuinely are private people, as they have said. And I think part of, Marissa started to talk about sort of the unregulated nature of the laboratories of fertility clinics. And had this not become public, nobody would know about it. There is no public reporting database, there's no database that fertility clinics need to report to that is then made public. So the public wouldn't know that this happened. And we think it's vitally important that the public is aware that these kinds of issues happen and that fertility clinics take accountability and try to make sure that this never happens again.
Jackie, did you have a follow-up a quick follow-up? You can unmute yourself.
It was actually around that very regulation question, Adam, that you just addressed. I just want to maybe follow up super quickly that, IVF really is in the national conversation now, and it tends to be extremely polarized and now almost getting lumped into, potential restrictions on reproductive health broadly. And this is clearly one of the issues that, to your point, it's a database where you can track these things. There's kind of there it seems like to be around patient safety, and I wonder if you guys can kind of talk about, what you hope lawmakers can take away from this horrible situation, as they're kind of deliberating on, IVF issues broadly.
Sure. It's a great point, Jackie, and something we've been talking about at Peiffer Wolf for over a decade. Unfortunately, we have way too many of these press conferences. Marissa and Stephen are not alone. We have represented so many victims of fertility center misconduct, and so much of this stems from the lack of regulation in the laboratories of fertility clinics. There is virtually no oversight of those laboratories. There are no unannounced inspections of fertility clinic laboratories. There is no reporting into a database of errors that are made, let alone such a database becoming public. We could go on and on about the lack of supervision, the lack of training, the lack of regulation. And I mean, tragically, this will not be the last such press conference, and we're not going to stop until these errors stop. And I just hope that legislators are looking at this and thinking, we need to do something about it. It's time to wake up. It's time to do something and change this unregulated Wild West state of the American fertility industry.
Thanks. Let's go to our next question. It comes from Aria Bendix at NBC News. Aria, please unmute yourself.
Thanks for taking my question, and thank you, Marissa and Stephen, for sharing your story. I think this might be more of a question for Adam. I know you said RPMG admitted that an employee did not label the embryos and then discarded them. Did they say, or do you have reason to believe that this was a nefarious act versus an act of negligence?
We have, well, first of all, thank you for your question, Aria. We don't know what motivated this employee to treat Marissa and Stephen's embryos like trash. We have no idea. All we know is that for some reason, nobody labeled their embryos. For some reason, nobody seemed to care about that. And for some reason, somebody decided that it would be a good idea to intentionally throw away those embryos. None of that makes any sense to us. And that, to me, is evidence of a very badly supervised laboratory, and one that needs a whole lot of help.
All right. Thank you, Aria. Let's take our next question. It's going to be a follow-up question from Leticia Juarez at ABC News. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Leticia.
All right, thank you again. I just want to clarify, Ms. Calhoun, you went through IVF treatments 3 times to grab the eggs or extract your eggs from you. Is that what I understand?
I went through egg retrieval, which, can be a part of the IVF process, or it can be done separately. So I went through egg retrieval beginning in 2021. I had 2 egg retrievals that year. I had 1 in 2022. Because of my severe endometriosis, we repeatedly did the egg retrievals to retrieve enough eggs to give me, a sizable amount of eggs to have the children I wanted in the future.
And then, Mr. Wolf, if I could ask you, this lawsuit's going to be filed today?
Yes, it already has been filed in Los Angeles Superior Court.
Okay. And you'll be providing us a copy of that?
Yeah, a copy of that should be posted already. If not, it will be very shortly to our website, lostembryos.com.
Yeah, and it's linked in the news release that was provided, and a link in the webinar chat here. So,
Oh, okay. Thank
all
you.
right. Thanks, Leticia. All right, let's go to our next question. It is another follow-up. It's coming from Christy Fajardo at Fox LA. Go ahead, Christy. And please unmute yourself. Sorry.
Sorry about that. This question is for Mr. Wolf. You mentioned that sadly you've litigated all too many of these cases. Have you had a prior case against this clinic and this doctor?
You know, we do not presently have any cases against RPMG. You know, I'm not really going to comment one way or another about whether we have had any in the past. But I will say that this is not the first instance, and hardly the first instance, where we've represented a couple whose embryos were thrown away by their fertility clinic.
All right, thank you. Just a final reminder that if you have a final question and you want to use the raise your hand function or the Q&A box, we have a few more moments and we can take another question. But otherwise, we do want to make sure that everyone knows how to get more information following today's news event. You can connect with today's speakers or get more info by contacting Max Carlin at 703-276-3255. Again, that's Max Carlin, 703-276-3255. There will be a recording of this news event available online later today. The video just needs to process. It will be posted at lostembryos.com, but if you have any issues locating that, you can contact Max Carlin. It looks like we do have one last follow-up from Aria Bendix at NBC News, and we'll go ahead and take that. Aria, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question regarding the documentation that wasn't turned over. Is it possible that no such document did exist, given Adam, the lack of record keeping that you mentioned at fertility clinics?
Yeah, thanks, Aria. The document does exist because finally, after the fourth time, I believe, of prodding, RPMG finally relinquished that document. And what I was saying before about the lack of documentation is really a lack of public documentation, that there is no reporting requirements for these clinics to advise an agency when they make such a serious mistake, let alone a database that would then be available publicly so that the public would have all the information it should have when deciding where to seek their fertility treatment.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to clarify what type of document that was, or what it was able to finally disclose?
Well, I mean, it just disclosed that RPMG discarded, threw away, tossed out Marissa and Stephen's embryos. I have no idea why it took RPMG 4 requests in order to finally turn over that full set of records.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Aria, if I may just jump in as well. After you go through an egg retrieval or an IVF cycle or anything, an unthaw, and you create, the doctor, just like any other doctor, makes notes in your chart about how the cycle went, how many eggs were retrieved, how many eggs fertilized. And so they produced incomplete records that did not disclose the outcome of my my cycle. And so that is what they ultimately provided after we requested 3 times, and they replied with incomplete records 3 times.
Thanks, Marissa. And thank you, everybody, for joining this news event today. It was held by the law firm Peiffer Wolf. As a quick reminder, you can contact Max Carlin at 703-276-3255 if you should need anything or have questions. And otherwise, that concludes today's news event. Thank you so much. Take care.